Have you ever wondered what people mean when they say return the service with the spin or return it against the spin? Well, watch till the end to find out. Okay, so welcome back. We're going to continue where we left off last week and look into a little bit more about how your bat managed to impart spin to the ball. If you recollect, last week we spoke about something known as the normal force and something known as the tangential force. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the tangential force in a bit more depth. How does your bat manage to impart this force? I would say there are majorly two factors at play. One of them is friction. Let's say you just had a block moving on a surface. The surface would exert a force of friction on this block. And this friction force is given by something known as mu, the coefficient of friction, multiplied by the normal force. Table tennis rubbers with the table tennis ball have some of the highest known coefficient of frictions. Another factor is that the rubber is not a flat, hard surface. So whenever you try to apply a tangential force, the rubber actually deforms slightly. And then this deformed rubber acts like a spring and exerts this tangential force on the ball. So there you have it, the two factors in which you get the tangential force. An important thing to notice is that for both factors, the amount of spin you can impart does actually highly depend on the force with which the ball was hitting the bat in the first place. If the ball is just lying there, then the only force acting downwards is the weight of the ball, and there's only so much spin I can impart. This explains why backspin is one of the easiest things to do in a service. You can always impart a lot of backspin in your serves because the way the ball is thrown and it's landing, you have the perfect normal force required to create that backspin. If you wanted to create side spin, you would want that the ball hit the bat at an angle like this. But according to the rules of service, you can only throw the ball straight up and not at an angle, which is why it's difficult to generate a lot of side spin while you're serving. In fact, check some of these serves out by Pongfinity where they throw the ball on the bat. Some food for thought, rubbers like long pimpled and anti-spin rubbers have a very low coefficient of friction. We'll explore that more in a later video. For now, we know how this tangential force is imparted. But what is the direction of this force? You would say, isn't that straightforward? The direction of the force and the spin imparted would depend on the direction in which I move my bat, right? You would be right, but that's only true if the ball was stationary to begin with. But even then, this way of looking at the spin generated gives us an easy way to identify how to receive serves. One example is, let's say an opponent decides to start a serve with this action. You might be tempted to think that, because of this angle, they're going to be doing a backspin serve. But what's essential to know is that it would only be a backspin serve if this is the direction in which their bat moves. If they decide to move their bat in this direction, then it would actually be a side spin serve and not a backspin serve. Wait a minute, am I supposed to be doing this analysis every time I'm receiving a serve? I don't really have that much time when I'm facing a serve, The important point is you don't always have to think about the direction and the spin while you're receiving the serve. You just have to think through this once, and then you can receive that type of service anytime you want. For example, let's consider a serve where your opponent is doing something like this. Kenta Matsudera style. And if I ask you, what's the spin on this serve? If the opponent decided to contact the ball during the initial part of his action, you would have top spin on the ball. If they decided to contact it during the middle part, you would have side spin on the ball. And if they decide to contact it towards the very end, then you would have backspin. Next, let us look at the direction of this tangential force when the ball is already spinning. This is the part that's kind of cool. If the ball is already spinning, the direction of the force applied is not only dependent on the direction in which you're moving your bat, but it also depends on the amount of spin the ball had to begin with. Consider this small point. When the ball is spinning, this particular point would also have some speed in the upward direction. Now let's say you were moving your bat upwards with a speed that was greater than the speed of this point. Then the tangential force would be applied in the upward direction. But let's say that your speed was actually slower than this point. Then the tangential force would actually be applied in the downward direction. So what matters for this direction of the tangential force is not the absolute speed of your racket, but rather the relative speed between your bat and the point of the ball where it contacts it. Watch these two cases carefully. In the first case, the ball is actually spinning faster and therefore the force of friction actually acts downwards and the ball goes down. Whereas in the second case, the bat is faster than the speed of the ball and therefore the force acts upwards and the ball goes up. This explains why if you were to receive a ball with backspin, then even if you kept your bat stationary, this point of the ball does have some speed in the vertical direction and therefore the friction force that acts on the ball is going to be in the reverse direction and the ball is going to go into the net. And now we're finally ready to understand the two ways you could receive a side spin serve. One way is that you recognize that there is side spin in the ball and that the ball is going to deflect this way. So what you do is you adjust the angle of your bat such that after accounting for this extra effect, the ball does land on the table where you want it to. The other way to do this would be you approach the ball with a particular speed that matches the spin of the ball. So in this case, there is no spin effect or there's no tangential force that is going to be acting on the ball if you manage to match it exactly. You could also go a little overboard, in which case, the force would be in the other direction, but you'd basically be going with the spin. In fact, this is one of the receives that you will even hear Timo Boll talking about in one of his videos.
Here is an example against Wang Lichin.
Timo Boll refers to this as the delayed short receive, and he even mentions that he does this in order to take the spin out of the ball. You might be nodding your head when you hear this, but if you mention this phrase to a layman, he would ask you, what does it even mean to take the spin out of the ball? But one thing that you will notice Timo Boll doing while receiving is that every time he approaches the ball, he approaches it with a speed like this. Watch closely.
You can see it's not an aggressive receive, but since you turn, and because of that, they get to the ball.
Personally, I've noticed that when you receive the serve in the second way, you can land the ball much shorter on the table. Now that you know this, you can actually go back and try approaching the ball with various speeds and figure it out for yourself. This also gets us to the point about why it's helpful to know some of the physics behind it. If you never knew this, chances are you could have still figured this out on your own, but it would have taken you much longer. Now that you know this, you know exactly what's the factor with which you can change the way you're receiving. And not just that, using the stuff that we have covered in the last two videos, you can also do some other cool stuff, and we will look at a few more case examples in the coming few videos. And that's it for this video. If you liked it or have some feedback, do let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.